Why is big tech siding with Trump all of a sudden?
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Big tech was usually very liberal and sided with the Democrats, but several major tech CEOs, including the CEOs of Apple, Google, Amazon, and Meta, met with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago in late 2024 and early 2025 as he prepared for his second term as US president. I think they were trying to align themselves with the Trump's anticipated pro-business agenda, which included maintaining low corporate tax rates and deregulation. For instance, TikTok CEO looked to address the looming US ban on the app, which was saved by Trump. And others were concerned with AI developments and regulations, as well as antitrust issues, especially Microsoft and Meta. Essentially, they were there to kiss the ring. Biden was pretty critical of big tech, and they saw an opportunity to shift the relationship between big tech and Trump. A relationship with Trump meant securing government contracts, reducing scrutiny, and influencing policy decisions. They also made significant financial contributions to Trump's inauguration fund and have been implementing more conservative policies in their companies.
Big trends in technology right now with DEI.
Now the question is, was big tech conservative all along, and their liberal stances were a bit of a show to pander to the left-leaning political climate of, San Francisco and New York, which are very important for these companies? Or are they still liberal and jumping on the conservative bandwagon for their companies? Or maybe they just don't care at all. Maybe they're apolitical and just care about what's best for them and will flip-flop to whatever best suits their needs.
You think that people aren't going to just sell their homes and move?
We were at the Trump rally in Georgia where his supporters have a message for him.
Let him take the same test that I took.
Incidentally, I took the test too when I heard that you passed it.
Yeah, how did you do it?
Well, it's not the hardest test.
No, but
there's a picture and it says, what's that? And it's an elephant.
No.
I never said that. That's fake news. Thanks for being here tonight.
In January 2025, the startup Socrates, the godfather himself, Paul Graham, or PG, posted one of his famous essays. This one was titled, The Origins of Wokeness. If you don't know who Paul Graham is, or PG, he's the founder of Y Combinator, probably one of the most popular incubators in the world for startups.
I have a question. That was horrible.
After Paul Graham stepped away from YC, it was then led by the now OpenAI CEO and always worried-looking Sam Altman. Now, PG is a bit of a legendary figure in the startup world, and it's interesting that he wrote an essay that seems, a bit right-leaning. He starts his essay by equating wokeness with virtue signaling, which he calls prigs, and contends that every society has them. He's asking why wokeness is so prevalent now. He acknowledges that wokeness and political correctness are now pejorative terms referring to what he calls an aggressive, performative focus on social justice.
Now you're gonna sit there and you're gonna watch me do the same goddamn thing to you.
So far, not super nuanced, but it's an essay written by a programmer. Let's cut him some slack.
Hey Dinesh, nice chain. Do you choke your mother with it when you put your penis in her butthole?
What the fuck?
He admits racism is a problem, but he says it's a bit overblown by the wokes. He writes, instead of going out into the world and quietly helping members of marginalized groups, the politically correct focus on getting people in trouble for using the wrong words to talk about them. The problem here is that, yes, quibbling about semantics might be a waste of time, but it's important not to be quiet about the marginalized that are suffering and are actively being hurt, because that's how you get the message out to society. Actions are good, but you don't change the status quo by being quiet.
I'm not gonna beg. Please, 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 please.
Now, he goes on and attributes political correctness as coming from the universities, specifically the humanities and social science. Guilty as charged. He believes that the radical student protesters of the 1960s became professors, got into positions of power, and started making universities more politically correct. It's an interesting story, but he goes a bit extreme. This gave rise to what he equates to as a Maoist cultural revolution by professors unleashing their students to other professors. He writes, imagine having to explain to a well-meaning visitor from another planet why using the phrase people of color is considered particularly enlightened, but saying colored people gets you fired. He has another problematic example, and he goes on to say, there are no underlying principles. You just have to give him a long list of rules to memorize. Okay, this is where he goes really off the rails. It's not just about memorizing a long list of rules. There's a social and historical context. The reason why colored people is offensive is because it has colonial roots, especially to the Jim Crow era in the US, where colored was used to designate separate facilities, and it became emblematic of the systemic racism of this era. People of color gained new usage to separate it from this dark history, and it has a new cultural meaning to reflect the solidarity among racial groups and the linguistic significance of using the person first is also a step forward.
At local level, white Southern Democrats implement laws to suppress the political and economic gains made by African Americans.
You could tell this well-meaning visitor from another planet that the underlying principle of treating others with dignity can include linguistical changes to reflect socio-political history.
Your behavior was boorish and juvenile.
You were rude, vulgar, and uncouth.
Look, I'm not here to bash Paul Graham. I'm here to use this as an example of how tech bros who are seemingly nice and progressive become more and more conservative and almost red-pilled when they're left to their own devices, especially in this conservative political climate. Now, in defense of Paul Graham, if you really read between the lines, it sounds like he wants to be a nice guy, and some woke mob accused him of some moral failing, and he's lashing out at their impossible standards. Totally fair. Leftist communities are definitely very toxic, and they're filled with hurt people who demand nothing less than moral perfection, and critiquing others
is part of patriarchy. The idea of certain people are inherently more valuable than other people because of superficial physical attributes is part of patriarchy.
It's a bunch of hurt people hurting people. Now, Paul Graham is the nice old man who hasn't kept up with all this new leftist discourse and is being bashed for it. It's a bit unfair, right?
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
Paul Graham continues and dives into the idea that women seem more attracted than men to the idea of being moral enforcers, which he attributes to the expanding definitions of sexual harassment.
Shut the fuck up. Feminists do not want you. Shut the fuck up.
Here he somewhere between insensitive and downright misogynistic. Again, a lot of half-baked ideas that a basic humanities education would dispel. Hell, just type, why is X hypothesis a weak theory and potentially sexist into ChatGPT and you get the basic points. This is why tech nerds with their brilliant minds developing in higher education, only exposed to STEM courses, really need an education in the humanities.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future.
He goes on into the second wave of political correctness, which he argues started with social media. He actually makes some interesting points here. He says that cancel culture arose from social media because social media is designed to spark outrage. Outrage attracts viewers. It sells papers. It's how a lot of companies make a lot of money. He attributes this commercialization of political correctness as the reason for the morality of political correctness being so corrupt. It's superficial, it's performative, it's driven by some corporate scheme. And it's made its way to hiring practices, politics, and everywhere around him. Again, nice old man, stuck in a world where norms have changed. What are these pronouns? Why is everyone saying I'm sexist? Why is doing what I always did considered racist?
No, it's the children who are wrong.
Now, the fact that people are profiting off of moral progress doesn't mean that moral progress in itself is a bad thing. If some evil corporation wants to improve their PR by hiring more disabled Asian actors, or if a board of directors wants to get more varied perspectives by hiring gay women, and they profit off this, it doesn't mean that the moral progress of having more representation and less racism is a product of some capitalist manipulation. It's actually the other way around. We have moral progress and capitalism wants to manipulate that for its own ends.
Is it any wonder the result was just as unspeakable as that thing? Bring it back here.
What I see from this essay is a man who's scared of being left behind and trying to find a problem with progress and change. And there's always going to be problems with progress and change. TV, they said, would make all our kids dumb. AI will take all of our jobs, or cancel culture will condemn people that are actually good people.
No, it's the children who are wrong.
And if you're not keeping up with moral progress, of course, you're going to have some social faux pas that are going to be open to criticism. Like that old lady from the nursing home that calls me the handsome Oriental boy. You can say these things in the same way you can say that you like kicking dogs or making fun of poor people. But it doesn't mean that you're free from social censure. A part of moral progress is necessarily going to limit certain things. Acknowledging animal rights means that you can't really kick dogs anymore, and you're going to be given weird looks and criticisms if you say that you like doing that.
Why are you so high maintenance?
Do you want me to answer that, sir?
No, god damn it! You're so needy.
Are these woke people like religious extremists in the calling for the cancellation of even the most innocent mistakes by well-meaning people? Some of them, yeah. Sorry, Paul, just get off Twitter. But most of the traits of wokeness, the consciousness of systemic inequities affecting the marginalized and vulnerable, are positive instances of moral progress, and it actually brings us closer to the values of liberal democracies. These powerful figures in tech are taking steps towards the conservative right-wing pipeline.
You think when I dropped below $1 billion, I walked around telling everybody? Fuck no. You guys were the only ones who knew, and I actually thought about having you killed.
And what's so dangerous is that these companies are making so much money and influencing every part of our lives with their algorithms, AI, and whatever they come up with next. It's frightening.
Dress unattractively when you tell them. I read a study. The less sexual interest they feel for you, the less perturbing it will be.
You ever notice the Hollywood trope that some nerdy, awkward guy falls in love with the hottest girl and eventually ends up with her?
Hi. Mind if I touch your wiener?
What?
Dog.
Let's think about who's writing the scripts of these types of movies that are making these tropes. Are the scriptwriters in Hollywood very confident, slick jocks writing about nerds? No. People write about their own experiences, according to their own worldview, their own moral norms, and it's all reflected in their product, their art, their movie. And their product or art has an impact on society. The movie about the awkward underdog winning over the hottest girl is a fantasy that pervades into the rest of our culture. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "I cannot remember the books I've read any more than the meals I've eaten. Even so, they have made me." You can't underestimate how much your worldview is shaped by the worldview of others in the form of media, whether it's through movies, songs, books, news, or whatever daily interactions you have in your life. Even if you don't think you remember them, at one point in your life, it was processed by your brain and may have changed some posterior decision that you made, and it's making you who you are now. Now think about the products from big tech and how they can influence you. The algorithms in social media, the AI agents, and everything behind the scenes of how your workplace runs, how your healthcare works, and even how some government decisions are being made. One of the most persistent problems in big tech is sexism. STEM, the science, technologies, engineering, and math, is clearly dominated by men. It's a male-dominated field, and the culture of these big tech companies is shaped by these people. The awkward tech geniuses that grew up with other nerdy guys or internet forums like 4chan, or just the inertia of what was around them, which tends to be, rich, conservative corporate types. Over 70% of women working in tech roles have experienced some sort of sexism, and over 20 have reported some sort of sexual harassment. You can see more subtle forms of sexism in the form of the objectification of women, reinforcing gender stereotypes and biases, like AI assistant voices being more often than not women. Not to get too psychological here, but the tech nerds I've come across have really niche obsessions and don't spend a lot of time socializing. They care about hard puzzles and not so much about politics, the suffering of others, or engaging in diverse perspectives. You see this when they're speculating or getting philosophical for some reason. Like when they talk about artificial general intelligence, or the kind of AI that can match the general reasoning capabilities of human beings. You can see glimpses of the media that they consume growing up and what their worldview is really like. There's like a weird catastrophizing over AI taking over. There's remnants of, HAL 9000 or the Terminator or iRobot. Then there's this weird sexual or romantic repression that comes from always seeing women as the other or objects of sexual gratification. We see this reflected in the media too, like Ex Machina, Westworld, or Her, having the richest and influential and most powerful heads of companies holding these worldviews and shaping our technological futures is dangerous. They're not just making cold machines that are value neutral. They're creating products that reflect the way they see the world and shapes our culture and future in the same way Hollywood writers do with their movies, except technology can be much more harmful and have malicious consequences for a lot more people.
The answer is no.
Wrong. You do this deal or I pull your funding.
There's a kind of tunnel vision with people obsessed with tech that make them great at solving problems that they care about. But it also makes them apathetic about everything else. The social issues, the people suffering, and how to make things more fair and equal for everyone. The morals, the values, the ethics, and all the stuff that gets in the way of moving fast and breaking things. Elon Musk is an interesting case study. There's a weird pipeline from being an awkward tech nerd interested in solving problems to becoming a successful tech bro and actually solving these interesting problems. And then things getting in the way of solving problems, namely those pesky leftist ideas of trying to protect the marginalized and making sure society is more fair and equal, and reacting to this obstacle to the problem by reacting against leftists or leftist ideology. Without understanding aspects of humanity and the cultural and historical context of what leftists are saying, you can definitely see how leftists are stifling progress in technology, putting more restrictions on, say, your speech, and being generally the mean teacher scolding you for misbehaving. There's a subtle but terrifying move. The vilification of the left becomes an alliance with the right. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. This reminds me of what happened with the moral majority movement of the 1980s. This movement was founded in 1979 by Jerry Falwell Sr., and it was sparked by an increased separation of church and state in the US by a number of rulings by the Supreme Court, like the banning of school prayers and Bible reading and legalizing abortion. And this led to a rise in the Christian right. Many Christian conservatives and centrists were fine with the separation of church and state and generally supportive of the movements of the time, like civil rights, women's rights, and gay rights. But maybe they disagreed with abortion or felt like their worldview was being attacked by introducing, say, evolution in schools. Whatever their individual reasons were, their vilification of the opposing side of the view ultimately led them to side with the extreme Christian right. What began as a ideological disagreement escalated to extremism, joining the Christian right and their fight. Once you're in this pipeline, you just sink further and further in. I'm worried that this will happen to big tech. You can start off disagreeing with some leftists on some ideological point, say the use of canceling, but it's so easy to find people agreeing with you that are much more extreme and slip into right-wing pipelines. This is why it's so important to study humanities. You learn from the mistakes in history. You see the varied ideas of human thought, the number of perspectives around the world, and you become more aware of all the issues and suffering in the world. It helps you frame new ideas within a larger mosaic of ideas, and it helps you be more empathetic to your fellow human beings. These tech bros are so busy solving problems, building companies, that they only get bits and pieces of ideas that they acquire secondhand. Whereas in the humanities, you kind of get to dive deeper into elements of philosophy, psychology, history, sociology, anthropology. It helps you frame new ideas within a larger mosaic of ideas, and it helps you be more empathetic to your fellow human beings. It gives you perspective on what priorities matter beyond your own.
We uncover a multi-billion-dollar scam, wreaking havoc on the nation's youth.
They called it a master's in fine art.
After I got my master's, I thought I was done. But then they told me if I really wanted to get ahead, I needed to get my PhD.
So you needed to pay for more levels.
Yes. You know what it's like? Scientology.